I'm going to do a new video for essay pairs for 2016, and this corresponds to the review session that I had tonight on Thursday, June 9th. So this is for people who possibly couldn't come or would like to review it again. You may have this paper. If you don't, this is basically the setup of the paper I handed out during the review session tonight. And we started with geography, and basically what I'm doing is I'm just taking what I feel would be the best things to write about. So for geography, you might have choices like mountains, deserts, natural resources, or river valleys, but sometimes natural resources aren't there. Sometimes it's a DBQ where they only give you 3 and you pick 2. So let's look at river valleys and desert. River valleys, we go back to the Neolithic age when humans started to settle along rivers because of their fertile soil. You don't want to just say that rivers gave water. There are the 4 river valleys, the Tigris and Euphrates, Nile, Indus, and Yellow. Then you want to give examples for the impact bullet. The Tigris and Euphrates River is where Hammurabi lived in the civilization called Babylonia, and he makes that code written in stone, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And then the Sumerians, of course, invent the wheel, and they use cuneiform, which is a distinct writing system. On the Nile River, of course, you have the Egyptians, the pyramids, the great pharaoh, the leadership, that complex institution, irrigation, the use of paper. And then for the Indus River Valley, you have the Gupta, and they have their golden age and their concept of zero and their planned cities. And one of the planned cities' names is Harappa, and the other one was Mohenjo-daro. The Yellow River Valley in China, of course, yields great Chinese achievements like the stirrup for horses, smallpox vaccination, the Chinese alphabet, calligraphy, porcelain, which is what we call China, but they're Chinese, so they call it porcelain. And of course, all of these civilizations have the characteristics that all civilizations have. They all have government and religion. They all have technology, they're all urban, they all have jobs or social hierarchy, and they all have technology and writing. I think I said technology twice, sorry. Okay, so if we look at the concept of a desert and the impact of the desert on people, you need to look at the Sahara Desert in North Africa. It's very arid, it's very difficult to farm there, but the Trans-Saharan Trade Network does develop there, and 3 kingdoms that survive in this Trans-Saharan Trade Network are Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. And they pretty much go in chronological order. And of course, they're going to trade gold and salt. And Timbuktu is going to become one of the best cities for trade in this region. And it's also going to be a city of learning and university. And the Islamic traders during their golden Islamic age will develop Timbuktu. Mansa Musa, the king of Mali, is going to travel for a long year on a camel, of course. He's not walking. And he's dropping gold coin as he goes to his pilgrimage to Mecca to demonstrate the Hajj, to demonstrate being a good Muslim, and he also spreads Islam. But he also shows the wealth of Mali as well. And so he's a great example of cultural diffusion. For economic systems, you might encounter manorialism, which is part of feudalism, of course, in the European Middle Ages. You might encounter mercantilism, which is part of the European colonial system. And then, of course, you might encounter capitalism and communism. I want to go over to capitalism and communism one more time. You want to look at the features of each economic system and the historical impact. So for capitalism, you've got private ownership, the concept of laissez-faire, which is that French term for hands-off or let do, which is no government involvement, which is in the purest form of capitalism. This idea of supply and demand, and of course Adam Smith said that there's an invisible hand in a market capitalist economy where things like supply, demand, price, production will be taken care of based on real need, real want. Of course, Adam Smith is a Scottish man, wealthy man living in the British Empire, and he writes the book The Wealth of Nations in the 1770s. He's both enlightened and part of the Industrial Revolution. Impact of capitalism is, of course, the Industrial Revolution and England. And why does it start in England? You know this. It starts in England because they have manpower due to urbanization. It starts in England because they have a stable government. It starts in England because they have investment capital, And they have investment capital because of their trade and because the sun is beginning to never set on the British Empire. And of course, that will just become more and more true from the Industrial Revolution on. And of course, they have great minds and inventions. They also have raw materials like coal and water. And of course, this industrialization leads to European imperialism, of course, with Britain leading that imperialism because industrialized European countries wanted raw materials and markets. They also thought that they were awesome, so they believed in social Darwinism. They truly believed in the white man's burden, the title of that poem by Rudyard Kipling. An example of the impact of capitalism is the Berlin Conference, led by Otto von Bismarck of the newly unified Germany at this time, and how the Europeans carved up Africa for raw materials and natural resources and markets, and then they went, of course, to India, and of course then to China, and then later to the Middle East. For communism, it's different than capitalism. It's government planning production control. The government decides what's produced, how much it will be produced for, how much people will be being forced to pay for things. There's no private ownership. And a great example of that is collective farms, where people give up any ownership to the land. They work communally, they live communally together. And they're supposed to, in this communist utopia, share the wealth. Karl Marx writes about this theory in the Communist Manifesto, where he says that all history has been a class struggle, the haves versus the have-nots. And of course, he's writing this at the end of the Industrial Revolution's first wave in Britain in 1848, and he's really writing in a pro-worker kind of message. And of course, you remember he calls the workers the proletariat, and he has a disdain. He does not like the bourgeoisie and the elite, the middle class and the elite, who he feels exploits the workers. Of course, two examples of the impact of communism are the Russian Revolution in 1917 and World War I, and of course the Bolshevik Party promised the Russians peace, land, and bread, or peace, bread, and land, and peace will get you out of World War I, bread will get you food because you're literally starving, and economic opportunities, and land will redistribute the wealth so that everybody shares the wealth, everybody shares the work. Lenin, of course, has to fight a civil war. Then once he gets power, he wants to keep power, so he uses the secret police. It's called the Cheka under him. He uses propaganda, but he also realizes that the economy needs some private ownership, so he allows for that in his new economic policy, often abbreviated as the NEP. This is very close to what Gorbachev will do later in the late 80s with his perestroika. Of course, Stalin then, of course, takes it one step further, maybe 5 steps further, with his 5-year plans and his collective farms and his gulags and his persecution and his propaganda. And he uses the idea that, oh, Russia, stay with me, we'll get to a communist utopia. And then, of course, the Chinese Communist Revolution really begins in World War II when the Japanese invade China, and Mao takes the peasants on a long march and gets them to safety, and he reads to them from the Communist Manifesto, and he promises them if they support him, then they'll have a better China. He does come to power after the Civil War, after World War II in 1949. He makes China a communist country, and he says, we're going to take a great leap forward. We know that this is a disaster, because he says, make steel in your backyards, and of course they make very weak steel. He says, okay, everybody, super produce food. Then the government takes that food, but it doesn't redistribute the food back to the people. And then, of course, that fails, so they go in 1966-67 into the Cultural Revolution, and that's mind control, propaganda, the Little Red Book, the Red Guards, the Red Scarf Girl, just horrible. And we don't really see a change until Deng Xiaoping and the four modernizations, but still, China is still a communist country, and they still control what's produced, how it's produced, with some private ownership. Political systems is another choice. You could have absolute monarchy, limited monarchy, fascism, communism, theocracy, democracy. I'd like you to pick absolute monarchy and fascism. If you look at absolute monarchy, what you're looking at in terms of its feature is this idea of the divine right of kings, that God chose the rulers, and therefore you don't argue with God. And this is really from the 1500s to about 1800. And these divine right monarchs get their money through taxation, heavy taxation. And once colonialism comes a part of the European process through mercantilism. And remember, mercantilism is that theory that the mother country should benefit from its colonies through raw materials and through trade and through controlling the trade of its colonies. Louis XIV, XIV, is the best example of an absolute monarch in the 1700s, and he, of course, builds the Palace of Versailles, has 5,000 well-manicured acres, has 17 gold-encrusted mirrors in the Hall of Mirrors. The servants run to each fountain and pump the well for the fountain so the water's spurting when Louis is walking around those gardens. It's opulent. Impacts of the absolute monarchy could be seen like in Henry VIII as well, in how he was supposed to be like this defender of the Roman Catholic Church, and then he needs a divorce or wants a divorce, and so he makes England the first Protestant country so that he can control religion in his country. And also an impact is the Enlightenment of the 1700s and how the enlightened thinkers started to talk about the natural rights of man. They wanted more rights. They wanted to limit the power of any king. John Locke is of England, and he says life, liberty, and property in his 2 treatises on government. Montesquieu writes a book called The Spirit of the Laws, where he talks about the 3 branches of government, judicial, executive, legislative, so that there's a balance of power. Voltaire says, I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend with my life your right to say it. He's really a person who is a proponent or a supporter of freedom of religion and, of course, freedom of speech. Fascism is another example of political systems. It is defined as extreme nationalism. During the interwar period, the 1920s and 30s, between World War I and World War II, we get the Great Depression and economic and political problems that make the environment ripe for fascism. We also get the Treaty of Versailles and its impact in 1919, and how the Treaty of Versailles harshly blames Germany for World War I. It makes Germany lose its territory. It makes Germany pay reparations, almost 30 million, and it strips of its military. Mussolini of Italy also was unhappy, so when he leads the fascist party in Italy in his black shirts, he uses propaganda. He says to the Italians, I'll make Italy great again. I'll restore Italy to the grandeur of Rome. That is why he invades Ethiopia, because Italy was very unhappy with what happened with the Treaty of Versailles. And the League of Nations is so weak and can't stop him. And then Franco, of course, is the fascist leader of Spain involved in the Civil War, and he allows Hitler to bomb his own people in the city of Guernica. And Hitler is able to practice his new Air Force moves and dropping bombs on innocent people. And it's just horrible. And this is even before the war even starts, World War II even starts. And then Hitler, of course, tries to overthrow the Weimar Republic during 1922-23 in his Nazi party. And that example of overthrowing the Weimar Republic is called the Beer Hall Putsch. That sends him to jail, and he writes his book Mein Kampf, in which he outlines all his fascist plans, his idea that Germans need living space. He calls it Lebensraum. That means, hey, we need to take over territory. His idea is that Jews were a cancer and needed to be cut out like a cancer. He called for the final solution. He sets out his plans for basically the Holocaust, and sets the stage for when he does come to power in 1933. He will use propaganda, and a great example of that is the movie Triumph of the Will, which the Nazis make, and show these young German men with their shirts off, exercising, eating. This is during the Great Depression, and they're showing prosperity, and look, follow me, you'll do awesome. And all these fascists are very militaristic. They're always wearing their military uniforms and such. Okay. For the technology essay, I caution you not to talk about the tech piece too much, and talk more about the feature and talk more about the impact on everything. So let's look at the printing press. Of course, Johann Gutenberg, early Renaissance. He invents the printing press. Before this time, monks copied books by hand, and only the wealthy were literate. Of course, this increases the production of the Bible, and not just in Latin anymore, now in people's vernacular, so in English and German and French, and people could read the book for themselves, and people could interpret the Bible for themselves. This, of course, leads to the Protestant Reformation led by Martin Luther and his 95 Theses, 95 reasons why he really does not think that indulgences are part of the Christian faith. They're not in the Bible. And a guy named Johann Tetzel used to go around the Holy Roman Empire and other places, and his sales pitch to sell indulgences was, if a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory spring. And Luther said, I don't see this in the Bible. So the Reformation will end the Roman Catholic control. It will end the unity of Christianity in Europe. And of course, another example is Henry VIII making England Protestant. In terms of nuclear technology, you need to start probably with World War II and the dropping of the atomic bombs by the United States on Japan on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. And then Japan doesn't surrender, so the United States drops a second bomb on Nagasaki, Japan on August 9, 1945. And so basically what you need to understand, the United States is responsible for unleashing the first weapon of mass destruction, or WMD. But nukes can also be used, or nuclear technology can also be used for energy, somewhat clean energy. The impact of nuclear technology is the Cold War from 1945 to 1990, a war of words because of MAD, mutually assured destruction. The United States and the Soviet Union were very reluctant, did not want to go to war because of the fear of nuclear destruction. An example of nuclear energy gone bad, and it's a unique example, was in 1986 when the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine, which was part of the Soviet Union at the time, had an accident. And now Chernobyl is basically a ghost town surrounded by lots of animals. Today, Iran is pretty much campaigning for nuclear energy. It's saying it doesn't want nuclear weapons. It's in negotiation with the United States and other countries. This is a very tense negotiation ongoing, and Iran's relationship with Israel has been extremely tense, and so there's a lot of threat here. And there's also just the threat of countries having nuclear weapons. North Korea has nuclear weapons. India has nuclear weapons pointed at Pakistan. Pakistan has nuclear weapons pointed at India. We have nuclear weapons. France has nuclear weapons, and this is called nuclear proliferation. And there's been many talks to try to not have as many nukes in the world. And a couple examples are SALT I and SALT II, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty 1 and 2. And then there's been lots of other treaties to try to say to the countries that have nukes, let's not make any more, trying to be responsible. The last topic could be nationalism, and again, a lot of these can be turning point essays as well. You could have German unification, the Balkans, and pre-World War I, the main causes you could look at. Arab-Israeli conflict, the conflict between India and Pakistan, or the Indian independence movement, Gandhi again, the 1996 Bosnian genocide, or the 1994 Rwanda genocide. I'd like to take German unification and Arab-Israeli just to kind of review those again. If you don't know this, the German unification starts with the Holy Roman Empire, which Voltaire said was neither holy nor Roman nor really an empire, which means they were neither really that Christian, they were definitely not Roman, they were far from Roman, and they were never an empire. They were about 360 small states. And one of the best states in terms of its military power was Prussia. And Otto von Bismarck was a Prussian noble. He was a Junker. And he unifies Germany. He unifies Germans through something that he calls blood and iron. And that happens by 1871, which is a great, important pre-World War I example of nationalism. So let's look at his impact. Blood. Bismarck will wage 3 wars, and the most important is the Franco-Prussian War, where the people of Paris were reduced to eating rats. It sets up this animosity between France and Germany will invade France in the Franco-Prussian War, Germany will invade France in World War I, and of course Germany will invade and take over France in World War II. And then the iron piece is industry, and Germany will lead the Second Industrial Revolution after unification, and this will allow Germany to create great technological weapons like submarines and airplanes and the machine gun and tanks. And also an example is the Berlin Conference, again led by Bismarck, and where the saying was Germany wanted a place in the sun, that sun that the British Empire was also in. and of course, again, military technology in World War I. The Arab-Israeli conflict could go way back to the diaspora and the Roman Empire kicking out the Jews. And this is not right on this. This was not supposed to what I was supposed to say. Okay, so the Arab-Israeli conflict is not on there correctly. So let me explain the Arab-Israeli conflict so they don't have to redo this whole movie. Okay, Arab-Israeli conflict should read this. Let me fix this right now. If we look at the Arab-Israeli conflict, what we're looking at is nationalism. But we have to start with the diaspora. And that, of course, is when the Romans kick the Jews out of the Holy Land. And this leads to anti-Semitism, which also leads to Zionism. And of course, Zionism is Jewish nationalism and the belief that Jews should live in the Holy Land. And then, of course, Britain will control this area of Palestine, especially after World War I, and they will issue something called the Balfour Declaration in 1917. And the Balfour Declaration was the British support for Zionism, and it really alienated the Palestinians because they were already living there. One of the big things about the Arab-Israeli conflict is that it is about nationalism. It is. It's Jewish nationalism. It's Palestinian nationalism. It's Arab because it's part of the Arab world saying that they didn't want this to happen. And it's post-Holocaust. And it includes many wars, like the Six-Day War, the War of Independence. So the Independence War of 1948, sorry. I'm doing this late at night. And the Six-Day War, which lasts a long time, 6 days. And then the Yom Kippur War are all times where Israel has to fight another country and they always take more land. And so from that you get the Camp David Accords, which is a peace accords, which tries to make peace between Egypt and Israel. Unfortunately, the leader of Egypt, a guy named Anwar Sadat, will be killed for making peace with Israel. Another peace accord are the Oslo Peace Accords, and this unfortunately will lead to the Prime Minister of Israel getting assassinated for making peace with the Palestinians. We also have this group called the PLO, which are the Palestinian Liberation Organization. We also have a group called Hamas, which is a terrorist organization turned kind of legitimate. And then we also have the Party of God, or Hezbollah, which is a terrorist organization that is pretty much funded by Iran and is very anti-Israel. Okay, so those are just my top picks, and feel free to go over this again and also look at the other video that I made last June because that has different ideas for essays. Okay, thanks. Bye.